In the 15th century, Malaya was a country with its well-known strategic location that exposed to the global trade and foreign culture which make them colonized by a lot of countries. Portugal is the first European to reach Malacca in Southeast Asia in 1509. Although he was initially well received by Sultan Mahmud Shah, trouble was ensued quickly. The general feeling of rivalry between Islam and Christianity was invoked by a group of Goa Muslims in the Sultan's court after the Portuguese had captured Goa. The international Muslim trading community then convinced Mahmud that the Portuguese were a grave threat that had captured several of his men, which attempted to attack the 4 Portuguese ships although they had escaped. The Portuguese decided to take over Malacca by 1,200 men and 14 ships. They arrived in Malacca in 1511 and had rescued the other Portuguese who had been taken prison in the 1509 expedition. 24th August 1511 was the day Portuguese conquered Malacca. After the Portuguese conquered Malacca, the former Sultan did a few attacks in the year 1517, 1520, 1521, 1525, and in 1583. A peace treaty was signed after so many trials to get back Malacca. From then, Malacca had become the target of the other colonizers due to its strategic position as remarkable trading center. During that time, the Portuguese implemented a few trade administrative system policies which caused the trade in Malacca port to decline. Besides that, the Muslim traders were discriminated against during the conquest of Portuguese, which eventually leads to their downfall to the hand of the Dutch. Dutch was the longest period to control Malacca in the year 1641 to 1795 and the year 1818 to 1825. It had ruled Malaya for almost 183 years with intermittent British occupation during the Napoleonic Wars during 1795 to 1818. The British first came in the 1700s, attempted to colonize Borneo, to have a base in Malaya for new resources in Southeast Asia. In 1786, British gained a foothold in Malaya when the British East India Company procured Penang. Under the commandments of Francis Light, the British occupied Penang and founded Georgetown in Malaya. After that, British gained control in 1795 of what is now Malaysia when they threw out the Dutch. In 1826, Singapore, Malacca, Penang, and Province Wesley became the Straits Settlement under British control. During the colonization of British, Malaya was not a developed country. British brought impacts to people and the country in terms of economically, education, politically, and transportation. Therefore, peace and security was made by the British during that era. The main reason for British to colonize Malaya are to protect their trading interests in Straits of Malacca. Besides that, Malaysian peninsula is rich with tin ore, and British wants to gain control of these natural resources and raw materials such as pepper, gambir, tobacco, oil palm, and especially rubber in the Southeast Asia. The world suffered from the Great Depression, in which the economy faced a downfall. Unfortunately, Malaya did not escape from the depression. British decided to integrate the Malayan economy to the global supply chain during the depression. At the end of World War II, the Japanese surrendered. This has caused Malaya and Singapore to be placed under the British military administration. More than 3 years of darkness in the light of the South, depicted by the cruel atrocities committed by the Japanese, ordered to kill, burn, and steal. The Japanese gave no mercy to those who do not seek their loyalty, instantly murdering those who defy them, or at least in the name of mercy spared some from their torturous acts. Through the tales of survivors, we learn of how Malaya suffered and witnessed the barbarity of the Japanese soldier. Socially, the invasion of the Japanese led to a more distant relationship between local races. The Japanese military presented different treatments for Malay, Indians, and Chinese. The racial segregation concluded, whereby Malays were appointed as Japanese secret police or offered jobs and roles in the city. The Indians were forced into labor and sent abroad to work as construction workers. The booming amount of laborers forced into working day and night through monsoon and sweltering heat resulting in a food shortage, causing death and thus create the Death Railway. Whereas the Malay and Chinese were massacred due to the ongoing war between China and Japan, the soldiers did not hesitate to kill off any Chinese, and especially those who were in support of China's war of resistance against the land of the rising sun. Numerous civilians were subjected to mass killings, summary execution, rape, forced labor, arbitrary detention, and torture. The Japanese found it a hobby to rape and force girls into prostitution. Watering down to the term to comfort women, some as young as 16 years old, these predominantly sex slaves were sent throughout East Asia to work in brothels catering to the Japanese military. These comfort women were put in comfort station for Japanese men to visit for pleasure. It was told that a woman had to go through about 45 to 50 men per day and more during the weekends. Numerous death was caused by the brutal acts of the Japanese men, and only about 30% of the countless comfort women survived. During the Japanese occupation, the natives had no food as Malaya's entrepot trade was disrupted. The Japanese introduced food ration to control the essential food items such as rice, salt, and sugar. Each family have a peace living certificate to take their turn to buy essential goods. However, it takes a long hours to line up to get their food, and without the ration card, they will not be able to purchase the food even if they have the money. The duit pisang is widely used in the Japanese occupied territory, which caused the previous currency to become scarce. The Japanese authority mass-printed the notes whenever they needed it, which caused hyperinflation and depreciation in the value of the duit pisang. It was also prone to counterfeiting as the notes didn't have any serial number. The defeat of the Japanese in the battle abroad has led to inflation in price of goods as well as depreciation of the currency value. The native population were then reduced to barter as value of money had vanished. The Japanese approached and closed down the people's industries such as tin mines, rubber estates, and etc., which causes mass unemployment during the era. Most of the experienced workers were killed during the war, therefore there were lack of skilled workers for labor. During the colonization of the Japanese, they took over the properties and has caused damage to them. One of the ways that the Japanese marked their presence was through renaming the Tanjung Pagar train station to Shonan train station back then. The Japanese infused their ways in our everyday lives, starting by instructing the Association of Traders to learn and use their language, which is the Shonan Shokai, as their form of communication every day. Other than that, their culture was also widely advertised in newspapers to spread awareness of their ways and propaganda to the everyday person. Students and workers were also required to memorize and recite the national anthem, which is the Kimigayo, to instill the spirit of Japanese culture in their mind. They wanted to inject their culture starting from the young by introducing a new form of Japanese education system to the schools and also implementing the Japanese language, the Nippongo, as one of the requirements.